Welcome to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. We've been talking about the various effects that threat actors can have on their target. And in this video, I want to talk about second-order effects. Second-order effects, if you recall, is one of three major categories of effects that we've been talking about. Primary effects are the impacts on specific IT systems. Secondary effects are the impacts of the organizational processes and their capability. But second order effects are the impacts broadly on society. And so each category of effect can be measured differently. So when we talk about second order effects, what we're really talking about are the indirect impacts on society. And so a cyber event can create significant indirect impacts on that targeted organization, causing severe disruption to a key product or service. You can imagine something like a tire producer, and the inability to produce tires leads to a cascading effect on auto manufacturers around the country. The loss of that organization's output can broadly cascade through the supply chain and through entire critical infrastructure sectors, or even lead to physical destruction. Examples of this might include electrical transmission, nuclear power plants, port facilities, even pipeline operators. So second order effects have indirect impacts on society. They can broadly impact society in a number of different ways. They can be physical in nature, where the effect of that particular cyber event impacts directly the physical environment. So an example might be the sluice gates of a dam opening up and create flooding downstream. Or a nuclear power plant that is compromised and its containment system breached, leading to the release of nuclear material. But they can also be macroeconomic in nature, where the impact to a particular targeted organization leads to a disruption in the broader economy. So you can think of transportation networks like airports being taken down that create a larger disruption to the sector. Large manufacturers whose own disruption could lead to very, very significant disruptions in the supply chain. And finally, there can be impacts to the informational or perception of people. So kind of this informational effect, where the effect is actually measured in the belief system of people in that society. So voters, for instance, changing their perceptions about a particular candidate because data that had been compromised from a database in a cyber event now changes people's perceptions about the viability of that candidate. So a good example of what I mean by second order effects might be the Ukraine power event. Back in December 2015, threat actors had compromised part of the electrical grid in the western Ukraine. A multi-month campaign by threat actors led to a compromise of both the business network and what we call the production network. The production network were all these technical systems that managed and maintained the flow of electricity in that part of the Ukraine. Over 30 substations were taken offline, with about 230,000 people left without power for 1 to 6 hours. So the effects of that particular cyber event were primary, secondary, and second order. The primary effects were the specific devices that were left inoperable. And the IT manager is the one that's going to be primarily concerned about that issue. But there were also secondary effects. The ability to distribute power is compromised, leading to revenue losses. And so enterprise leadership is going to be concerned about that. The second order effects, however, the 230,000 people left without power, public officials are now concerned because there's a broader impact on society. So remember, hacking generates initial primary effects, but can lead to additional consequences. So a threat actor engages in the hacking process, conducts actions on target, but those actions are a cyber event, and those cyber events can have multiple consequences. There's a primary effect that are either disruptive or exploitive in nature. Those lead to secondary effects, which can have impacts on revenue, remediation, or even reputation. And if it's large enough, there might even be second-order effects that can impact the physical environment, the macroeconomy, or even the informational environment. So different attacks, different effects. Defacement of a website, where the primary effects are primarily felt over, let's say, the course of 30 minutes, may not lead to a lot of secondary impacts. Maybe there's some customers who are a little concerned about the safety of their information. There's not really any discernible second-order effects or impacts on society. But if you compare that to, let's say, a ransomware attack on an assembly line, where the primary effects are such that devices are actually down for, let's say, 72 hours, and secondary effects lead to large-scale disruption in all manufacturing, leading to large revenue losses and large, reputational impacts reflected in a share price plummet. But there are also now second-order effects where the supply chain itself is impacted. So different attacks can have different impacts. Some are primary, some are secondary, some are even second order. So the question becomes, is a cyber event a private problem or a public concern? And this is how a lot of policymakers really struggle with cybersecurity, and specifically cybersecurity incidents. How did they determine when to respond and when not to respond? So what are some of the takeaways? Well, cyber attacks generate effects on society that stem from failures in the organization itself. Second-order effects can generate impacts that are physical in nature, macroeconomic, or informational. Understanding how different cyber events can lead to a range of primary, secondary, and second-order effects allows us to determine if a cyber event is a private problem or a public concern. I hope you've learned a lot about how cyber events generate different effects and how that starts to play in public officials' understanding whether this is a private problem or a public concern. I hope to see you next time.